Hey everyone, I'm coming to you again with a new video. It has been a while, but life happens. I'm coming to you today again with nothing spectacular, but something that's actually pretty cool. They finally have come out with the transparent shells, the full transparent shell for the Steam Deck. This is the eXtremeRate. You can get it on Amazon for pretty cheap. It's only about 30 bucks, I think. It is quite a bit of work to get everything switched from the stock shell to the new one, but once you get it done, as you can see, it's very cool. Now, there's quite a few teardown guides. I'm going to do a guide of my process. Most of it's going to be sped up. If you have questions, you can slow it down or you can look at somebody else's. One of the things I think people have the most questions about is removing the screen from the original shell to the new shell. So I'm going to focus mostly on that. That's going to be the only part of my video that isn't sped up, so you can see, rather than a professional who's doing it from eXtremeRate with probably old adhesive, or somebody that does it every single day for a living, like from iFixit. Instead of watching that, you can see what it's like for the average Joe to get the screen out. And at the end, I'll power it on. You can see if I had any issues, and hopefully you enjoy it. If you do, let me know. If you want to see something different, let me know. Hopefully though, that'll answer some questions for you. I've had no problems with the shell itself. Some people have reported things like cracks or lines or things like that in their shell. Mine pretty much has the exact same fit and finish as the stock shell. It is slightly smoother. The texture is pretty much the same, but it is slightly more smooth than the stock shell. If anything, it's maybe even slightly more comfortable. So no complaints from me, really happy, and I hope you enjoy the video. Okay, so the very first thing you need to do anytime you're taking the shell off your Steam Deck for any reason is take out the micro SD. If you don't, it will break in half easier than you ever would expect. Ask me how I know. Then if you start up here at the top near the triggers, this is going to be the easiest place to get your tool to get that back panel to pop off. If you don't have thermal paste on hand when you're doing this, you can complete this disassembly without removing the heatsink. I did want to repaste mine though, so that's why I went ahead and removed that heatsink. Getting these triggers off is not as bad as I made it look. I just had to use a little bit more force than I was expecting that I would have to use. Basically, you're going to want to push in towards the middle of the Steam Deck, and when you do that, it's going to flex the tabs that hold it in place just enough that you can get it over the little piece of plastic that holds everything in place. You can complete this disassembly and assembly in layers on both sides, or you can do one side at a time. I opted for the one side at a time method. To get the L1 and R1 triggers out the rest of the way, you've got to get that battery chassis out first. You probably saw right there, I didn't realize that when I was tearing it down this first time. Now for the screen. This is actually kind of a balancing act because you need to get it hot enough that the adhesive will come apart, but you don't want any real hot spots and you don't want to overheat it. Otherwise, you're going to end up with dark spots on your screen or you'll kill it altogether. So what I did is I heated it slowly. My heat gun doesn't have an adjustable temperature range, so I ran it on the low temperature. You can use a hair dryer as well. eXtremeRate recommends heating the screen to 80 to 100 Celsius. I was using an infrared heat gun to see what it showed, as well as using my fingers to kind of see how hot it felt. I don't think I ever actually got it quite to 80 either. I probably got my screen closer to like 70 Celsius before it actually would come apart. So right here, when you see that red dot, that is me measuring that screen with that infrared thermometer. So I do a few rounds of heating on that, filling it with my fingers until it feels sufficiently warm before I start trying to pull with that suction cup. And what you'll see is once I think it's starting to feel hot and I test with that suction cup, I'm going to try it until it starts to lift. So at first it's not quite warm enough, but like I said, what you don't want to do is overheat your screen. A couple other methods I've heard of people using are putting it upside down on a 3D printer heat bed, which is actually a really pretty brilliant idea in my opinion, or using like a heated rice pack to leave on there and let that adhesive start to warm up without actually getting everything scorching hot. So right now it's starting to get pretty warm. Like I mentioned on that infrared thermometer, I think I was probably in the mid 60s when I first started trying to pull on this. And when you start pulling a little bit, that'll start to work the adhesive as well. But it was pretty obvious at this point it was not quite hot enough yet. Another thing you'll notice are the picks that I'm using. According to the guide, you don't want to go further than about a 1/4 inch under the edge of the screen, or you can damage the screen itself. They also include a metal pry tool or cutting tool to help you get the screen off. You don't want to use that either because there's black paint on the underside of that glass. And if you scratch that black paint, it's going to look like you have dust underneath your screen once you install it on the new frame. So what I ended up doing was designing some 3D printed picks that are about 1 millimeter thick You don't want to lift that glass any higher than you absolutely have to, because you don't want to crack the glass either. So you'll see me use their metal pick just to hold it in place once I actually get that screen to start to lift. And then on those 3D printed picks that I made made a bump in the middle so that I couldn't push it in further than that 1/4 inch that's allowable. And they're plastic, so they shouldn't damage that paint on the underside of the screen. If you don't have a 3D printer, the best thing to do for you is going to be to get some guitar picks and use guitar picks to do this. Again, you won't have anything to stop you from pushing too far, but just be mindful, it really doesn't have to go very far under the edge of that screen to get past the adhesive. So if you can't get it to lift, just keep heating, doing short little increments of heating until you're finally able to get that to lift. You're better off not having it quite hot enough and then redoing that multiple times just with a little bit of heat until it's hot enough. You're better off doing that multiple times than just overheating it. Also, the ring on the included suction cup is awful. You're going to want to have a spare off of like a set of keys or something before you try and do this. If you're getting bad suction as well, what I used was just some rubbing alcohol, isopropyl alcohol, to clean the edge of that screen, and then in a second I'll use it to clean the suction cup too, which makes all the difference in the world as far as its pulling power on the corner of that screen. So I'm finally starting to get the corner of that screen to lift a little bit, just not quite enough to get that included pry tool underneath the edge of it. I also don't actually want to use it to pry because I don't want to pry on the corner of that glass. I just want to get the screen lifted enough that I can slide it underneath the corner of the glass to hold it up so that it doesn't stick back down to that adhesive. So again, I'm not sticking it under the glass or trying to pry with it at all at the moment. So now that I've got the corner of that glass up, I'm going to start using those plastic picks that I made to get under the edge and to slide along and cut that adhesive. It's definitely good to have multiple, and that way you can stick one kind of along the middle of the progress that you've made, so that when you slip out or try to reposition, it doesn't stick back down to the adhesive. The most important thing here is just to take your time. Don't get too forceful with anything. Don't pry up any higher on that screen than you absolutely have to. And if it feels like you're really going to have to force something, just warm it up a little bit more. So now you can start to see why having a small handful of pry tools or guitar picks makes this process a lot easier. This edge I'm working on right now actually has the most adhesive and is probably going to be the hardest edge to get all the way unglued. Once you finally get your screen taken off, be sure you clean up the adhesive on the screen itself and on the chassis that holds the battery and the main board and all that. You can use the metal pry tool to get it off of this chassis piece because it's metal and you're not going to scratch anything that is going to matter when it's assembled. When you're getting the adhesive off of the screen itself though, use those plastic pieces or the guitar picks or whatever you use, but don't use any metal on the screen. You can also use some Q-tips and some isopropyl alcohol. It works pretty good. I found the easiest way was with those plastic picks, and then those Q-tips and the isopropyl alcohol will help you get the residue off. I don't remember if I mentioned or not, the kit actually does come with its own transparent buttons and transparent triggers. I chose to go with the black ones though because I think the contrast of the black on the atomic purple shell look really good. The kit also comes with all of its own screws, rubber to hold those buttons, and things like that. However, I opted to just use the screws from the original kit and the buttons from the original kit. All of those are compatible with the new shell. So once you get a couple pieces of adhesives in place that were included with the kit, it's basically just reassembling the kit the same way you took it apart. Right here, I did forget, you got to get that R1 and L1 trigger back in place before you can put that chassis in. Another thing I want to mention is I was doing this at night in front of a screen door, and there were several little gnats apparently making their way through that screen because they liked the big bright light I was using for my camera. So they kind of progressively get worse throughout the video. Just ignore them. A little bit annoying, but nothing I can do about it now. Another thing I should mention is these little touch pads when you're putting them in. The springs are actually pretty delicate, and there are 4 little protrusions next to the screw holes that actually hold them in the correct place. So when you're putting those back in, be mindful, make sure they are seated correctly before you try and screw them down. So throughout this entire process, I did end up taking a couple breaks. I had my camera overheat and a few things like that that extended it a bit. However, actual time making the swap took me about 3 hours start to finish. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave a comment in the comment section and I will take a look at that. If there's anything specific you'd like to see me do or see from me, go ahead and let me know, and I would like to hear that feedback from you. Okay, first boot, cross your fingers. So I thought this was a little funny. I don't boot from being powered down very often, and this process took long enough, I was starting to wonder if there was an issue or not. It doesn't seem like very long, but that first boot felt like forever. As you can see, about the time I started to worry, the logo came up on the screen and brought me a little bit of reassurance that everything was good to go. All right. Everything seems good. So